So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Sean Bosch. I'm a program manager with the School of Continuing Education, and I'm joined today by Dr. Candy Khan. She is an instructor with us and a consultant. She's taught a number of courses with us over the past couple of years, and we're excited to have her here today as part of EDI week at MacEwan. And today we're wrapping up EDI week. It's the last day. And we're excited to discuss allyship and some opportunities and strategies. So Candy, if you don't mind, jump into the next slide.
1 second, there you go.
I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the land in which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is a traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. So Candy, I'll hand it off to you and let you introduce yourself and jump into the discussion here. Just a little bit of housekeeping first. If you have questions, please use the Q&A to throw your question in there. And also feel free to add questions in the chat. If you want to discuss anything with anyone else that's on the webinar, you can have discussions in there, and we'll try to get to the questions at the end of the presentation. And Candy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Folks, thank you for coming. You could be anywhere right now. You chose to be here. My name is Candy Khan, and I want to thank Sean Bosch and his wonderful team at Continuing Ed to make this event possible and for inviting me. And I'll talk a little bit about myself as we progress in this particular, I like to call it, short gathering of ideas. And I come to you with over 20 years of experience in the EDI field, and I work both as an instructor, consultant, I'm an author. I've done some work. I will get into it, like I mentioned, as we progress in this particular webinar today. I would like to bring your attention to something I like to refer to as terms of relationship, and this is part of allyship. So before we get into the academic language and the theories behind it, let's try it out. This is the behavior. This is the actual, how we show up for each other. This is part of allyship. So one of the things that's really important to remind ourselves, whether you're in classrooms, you're in meetings, in your own personal situations, always speak from your own experience. That's where we start, and perspectives, because what we have is our own experience, and we're not here to challenge each other's experiences. Nor are we here to say to each other, my experience is better than yours. Second, we listen generously to the experience and perspective of others. So that's part of allyship too, is by holding space, creating supportive space for each other and to learn. That's where we have to be curious because we don't have their experience. And it's really important to resist making assumptions. This is hard. This is hard for me because of my life's experience and the conditioning, both from my culture, my family, and my work experience. I'm conditioned. Everything I have learned is through conditioning, is my experience. I have to be very mindful how I react, and I resist making assumptions. I refrain. It's not my job to fix, to save, to advise, to correct what you have to say. My job here is to share some ideas with you. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm here to just share some ideas. So please reflect on them. Some people need more time to reflect. Others are much more reactionary. We hold space for both. I'm going to rely on Olga and others to manage the chat and Q&A as I'm presenting, and they will alert me if I need to pause. We also have to be mindful, again, this is part of allyship, taking space and making space. What that means is if I see, or if you notice, in meetings, in classroom, in this context, one person is taking too much time, we gently remind them to create space for others. That's all part of being a good ally. Lastly, what is said in this context stays here. So confidentiality, personal information, learning can leave, these stories, personal stories stay. So I hope we all agree to these terms of relationships. And if I'm missing anything, please let us know. We'll add it to our next session. And if there are no disagreement, I will proceed. Because we all have to agree, because we're going to be together for the next 90 minutes. And if I hear no objection or no problem with this, I'll proceed. The agenda for today, folks, is really to get through this concept of allyship. Now, there can be multiple definitions. We're all in academia, I'm assuming, and we're practitioners as well. We have our own definition. So think about, how do you define allyship for yourself? Take a moment to reflect, because we might have 17 different definitions. None of them are wrong. We'll just unpack it together. Then the question becomes, why should be an ally? Is it my responsibility to ensure everybody's feeling included, welcome, acknowledged, has space? Or should I leave it to the person? Let them worry about it. The term micro-inequity can also be titled incivility. Now we're getting into the bucket of respectful workplace behaviors. So these are slight remarks. Those are important because that's where we really need our allies to show up for us, for all of us. And what are microaggressions? Now we're getting into more sort of the grounds, the human right grounds, and we'll explore those. I have some guidelines for you. We'll reflect on that together, and some do's and don'ts, just based on Ann Bishop's work, Candy's work on how to be not to be a racist, how to be an anti-racist, which is a very active approach. And this is just an agenda. It doesn't mean I have to stick to this. If you have questions, wondering, Dalopa is asking, will the PowerPoint be provided? Absolutely, no problem. I will provide that right away. In fact, Sean has a copy. You should take notes. Why? Because those are your notes. In other words, if I ask you to reflect on what is allyship, feel free. Reflect on that. Say, what does that mean to me? Does that mean I speak up for others? Or does it mean I privilege their voices? So just write that down. There are no right or wrong answers. We're exploring at the moment. So I say take notes because I find when I take notes, I have an opportunity to reflect on them. So again, reflect on a few seconds. What does allyship mean to you before I give you the academic definition and how it shows up? Good. So let's begin with what's an allyship. What do we mean by that? It always begins with a person with privilege. I'll unpack privilege for you. Privilege doesn't mean class. It doesn't mean I live in a big house, drive an expensive car, or has access to resources, although I could. Class is part of it. Privilege could mean many things. I'll unpack it for you in the next slide. And that's when we look around in our classes, in our workplaces, and we ask ourselves, these are all these layers of advantages I have, and how do I then ensure those that don't have those advantages always have an equal opportunity to participate? Participation in what? Participation in being able to express themselves. Participation in terms of promotion, special assignments, secondment, learning opportunities, ability to serve on boards, agencies, commission, whichever sort of growth you're in, do you have an equal opportunity? And those who in positions of power, are they aware of those barriers? And are they intentional about removing those barriers? That's what allyship is recognizing one's privilege. So it is, like I mentioned, the practice is unlearning and relearning. So part of my own learning is, even as a racialized minority woman of color, I still have a lot of privileges. I'm aware of it, and I'm mindful that I open up opportunities for people that didn't even know existed because I had access to those spaces. Building trust with people is really important. How do we build trust? We go in with a curious mind. We ask questions, but we also are vulnerable. And so this idea of allyship is also rooted in trust, consistency, I show up for you, accountability with marginalized individuals. So I know that Sean will speak up for me in certain context, and I might speak up in situations where I'll say to Olga, how would you like to proceed with this situation next time if it occurs? So we're strategizing together, not leaving people to figure things out on their own because I have access to certain knowledges, if you will. We'll keep building. This is not the definition, it's a definition, if you will. Let's unpack privilege, advantages, access to opportunities. Yes, it could be entitlement. I'm recruiting for a firm at the moment, and I hear people say, you know, this job should be given to me. This position in council should be given to me. And I wonder where that sense of entitlement is coming from. As we move toward a competency-based model, people get worried that I will lose my advantage. So it's really important to talk about what does entitlement means and how does it show up. And then also, we have to really take a look at, as I mentioned, the layers of advantages. So it's not a single thing. So think of these complexities. So all of you on this call, could be 75, 80 of you. What sort of advantages do you have in these buckets, if you will, for the sake of a conversation? Social class, middle class versus lower income, higher brackets, age. You know, in my line of work, I hear there's lots of ageism in many organizations. I remember working for a manager one time who said to me, you know, I try not to hire people over 35 in IT because they're difficult to train. It's a perception. It's a perception. So he's not an ally for people that are mature. Height could also be a privilege. Ability, neurodiversity, I haven't added that one. The ways in which we work, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion. So what's the dominant? What's in the peripheral? What's in the center? What's decentered? All of those layers matter. So being an ally is actually an active approach. We're not going to learn it today. We're just going to start, let those ideas percolate. What does it mean to me? How does it show up? How do I partner with people? And then how do we strategize? So then we can then be partners, and we can say, if this happened, and we're going to get to what this is, micro-inequities, aggression, racism, sexism, homophobia, and then how do we band together as a front and then approach the situation. I see Tara has raised her hand. Please proceed. Sean, are you able to hear? Because I can't hear anything. Tara, please continue.
Tara, maybe you'll need you to put your question in the chat. It's saying that I can't let you talk here.
Hi.
Oh, maybe you can now. Oh, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I unmuted myself and everything. I'm a little bit technology inept. Anyway, I have autism and ADHD. And for 47 years, I have faced bigotry. I have faced discrimination. I have faced exclusion at all ages and all stages of my life. And now that I'm in my 40s, I have another thing to contend with as a woman, and that is menopause and medical professionals saying, oh, it's just part of life, when certain features of marriage you want to keep alive. That certain life aspects tend to put you at a disadvantage. And I'm trying to be polite about things. Then there's the other side, how programs and having neurodiverse issues do not help you, because most programs for autism are meant for children when you could use certain services throughout your whole entire lifespan.
Yes.
Yet everything is geared towards children. I'm 47. I don't qualify for any program or any sort of income provincially because of my husband's income. When my husband dies, what happens then? I couldn't rub 2 nickels to save a dime for my life.
Yes, yes.
Because I don't understand the intricacies of banking and or money, because I don't understand the value of it. I know how to spend it like anybody, but how do you understand systems that are not made for you?
Thank you. Thank you.
Get the right resources when resources don't exist, and yet they existed when you were younger.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you, Tara. And I do want to acknowledge Jane's comment. This idea of disability abilities, absolutely. As I mentioned, as a person of, with abilities, I don't have to worry about access to spaces. And to your point, Tara, there are layers and layers. There could be an entire workshop on what you mentioned about the neurodiversity programs being geared to what I call the center, the dominant, able-bodied, cisgender. You can add other layers, and we need to expand again. Let me rephrase. When we are planning policies, when we are planning projects, programs, and Sean and I've had hours of conversation on this idea and the continuing ed team, because I facilitated workshops with this team, is we need to be mindful who's at the table, to your point. Because if we're missing the lenses, to your point, you're an adult, have these issues, ADHD, it could be autism, it could be other neurodiversity. Are the policies, practices, and program meeting the needs of those we serve? How do we know? And if we're missing those lenses, that's why I tend to start at the very top of the organization's Tara. So this stuff cannot be situated down at the front level. It starts at the very top of what I call, what we all call governance. And from governance, it goes to senior leaders. From senior leaders, it goes to mid managers, well, directors, managers, supervisors, frontline, because it's a trickle-down effect. Because if you're missing lenses at that table, your policies will always have deficiencies because we were missing those lenses at the table. So I thank you for your question. I am acknowledging that there are deficiencies in when it comes to programs. And I'm also acknowledging that the focus could be on children, youth, but and when it comes to adults, do we have programs in place? I agree with you. I think we need a further exploration. That's not to minimize your question, but it's to say, how do we then push for, advocate for those lenses at the table? And somebody mentioned disability action group, absolutely. So what do we need to do? I have groups, what we call them sometimes affinity groups in my line of work. Sometimes we call them D&I committees. What's the task for these committees? Maybe perhaps it's signage. Perhaps it's looking at culture. Perhaps it's looking at a pulse survey to say whether people's needs are being met. I'm going to pause here only because of time. Doesn't mean we cannot have this conversation outside of the structured class or workshop, whatever you want to call it today. So I agree, those layers are important. We need to be what you just did, make people aware. That's the first step. Second step is, what's my part to play? And my part to play is to be aware of my own privileges. And then take a look at what is in the sphere of control. What can I control? What can I do? How can I influence? Because I promise you, I cannot eradicate discrimination toward persons with disability. That I can promise I can't fix. I cannot fix racism. I cannot fix ageism. But I come back to an organization to take a look at what can we do in our control. And I will pause and I'll rely on Sean and Olga to facilitate if there's anything in the chat. So allyship is not, just going to go back. Once we recognize our privilege, we know it's about actively being vigilant, taking a look at what's happening around. One thing we need to be mindful is allyship is not about rescuing others. In other words, I know how to fix Tara's situation. I'm going to step right in and speak on her behalf, and I will then go now and be her spokesperson. That's not the goal, but it's to work with Tara, work with people on this call to take a look at how do we then bridge the gap. It's not a photo opportunity. As I mentioned in the terms of relationship, my job is not to fix. My job is not to bring the attention here. It's to, it's literally, in a true sense, it's to amplify the voices of others. give people whatever tools I have and say, here are my connections I can refer you to. Here are the things I have learned. Here's what's worked for me. Now it's up to you to say, true coach doesn't give answers. An authentic coach gets people to reflect on what do they need to do. It's a lot of inner work. People looking for those cookie cutter answers. And I try not to give those, because they might not work for you. So true allyship is understanding who you're working with and getting to know which lenses they are operating from. Let's talk about this concept of micro-inequities. It has come up a lot in the D&I world, diversity, equity, inclusion world. It's showed up in anti-harassment work. Subtle messages. It could be an eye roll. It could be arms folded, body language. This is not always verbal. It could be a slight remark. It could be, I don't introduce you because you have a different title than I do. It could be that I purposely mispronounce your name when you have repeatedly told me you'd like to be referred as Mackenzie. And I said, well, that's a long name. I'm picking on her because I know her. I like to call you Mac because it's easier for me. That will be a micro-inequity. Like I said, that all of these areas could also fall in incivility as well. And you purposely, or you introduce everyone except one person. You get in the office, you just say good morning to everybody except one person. That gets noticed and it builds up. It builds up. It builds up. I'm just going to check. Championing is, yes. So thank you, Tashner. Championing is also, again, that privileging of, I'm going to speak on your behalf. Let me see what I can rephrase what you're thinking, and I'll repackage it, and Candy will now represent you. So again, I'll go back to this idea of, it's not about championing my voice and making sure that I get the accolade that Candy has now brought this amazing neurodiversity issue to the table. No, it's working with the partners. If you have the affinity group with people, persons with disability, or again, person of color, Black, Indigenous group, whichever group you belong to or area that you're working in, working with that particular group to identify where can we leverage, where can we partner, so then the individual then steps up and say, this is how, because I want people to have their own voice and be able to explain things in the manner in which they see suitable. Now, if there are limitations, somebody says to me, I have limitations of expressing, I need some support, but that's a different conversation. Let me see what supports I can provide to you. I'm proceeding, and I promise I'll come back to all the, unless you raise your hand, I'll come back to chat in a minute, because if I go to chat now, I will be behind. So I'm just going to move forward, and I will go back to chat in just a second. Just as we started this conversation, and some of the comments that's already been raised in this, what I wouldn't call it workshop. Workshop means you're going to be broken into different groups and have a discussion. This space, issues have come up already, is to make things as invisible visible. What do I mean by that? There's a workplace culture. There's a school culture in McEwen. There's certain things that are said. Think of your classroom. Who has a voice? Who needs more time to reflect? By far, in most organizations, the extroverts tend to get more attention. Default. That's the default situation, default space. People that are outspoken, they take up a lot of space. Extroverts, direct communication. Sometimes individuals who need more time to reflect, to pause, often get missed. I just got off a call. I was working with a group in regional Waterloo this morning, and we talked about this idea that sometimes we need to hold that pause. Something as simple as allyship is holding that pause for 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 120 seconds, to allow introverts, people with neurodiversity, different cultures, different abilities to reflect. Am I uncomfortable with pauses? Absolutely. But I have to create that space. That's what allyship is. It's not what's good for me. Again, what's collective? What's good for all of us? How can we all show up as ourselves and feel we're open to each other's experiences? Tara, I have lived experiences and ideas and would love to get no quanta to help me others by developing person-centered program that benefit people from where they sit in life, no matter the age of ability. We'll definitely, I'll wait and I'll definitely come back to that. Absolutely. Thank you for that. So make invisible visible. What is the culture here? What is the culture here? Okay. And what is said and what's not said? Are people feeling safe? Do people have trust? If they speak up, are there repercussions for them? Right? So micro-inequities, if I come to you and I say, you know, when you come in the morning, you just say hello to everybody, I feel excluded. Is something going on here? Do I need to know something? What's happening? Because I'm activated right now. I'm feeling like I don't belong. That's how we mitigate. Microaggression, and again, purposely, like I mentioned, mispronouncing somebody's name when they repeatedly said to you, I don't like to be called by that shortened, hyphenated name that you created for me. So it is a lot of work. Allyship is not a passive approach. I'll wait till something happens. It's constantly being vigilant about your space, the culture. I'm talking particular classrooms, meetings, committee work. Who gets to speak in the committee? Who gets to be the scriber all the time? Whose voices are not privileged, if you will? If somebody's experiencing reality in the McEwen differently than yours, is there a possibility that people are experiencing reality different than yours? I say, yes, it is. The way Sean will experience McEwen is qualitative and quantitatively different than mine, because who I am, how I show up. And when people point that out to me, like let's say I've just ignored somebody unintentionally, it's a unconscious action. My job is not to get defensive. My job is to go in with a mindset of curiosity, to say, so help me understand, how did that behavior impacted you? What can I do different? Because I want to make sure you feel included. Because it is a collective activity. It's not up to the person. We all have to work at it together. So our job is not to become defensive and get upset, but rather inquire. Help me understand, what am I missing here? If that makes sense to people. Just keeping an eye on my handy dandy timer just to make sure. So again, let's look at allyship. Privileging voices, paying attention to our environment, knowing our location. So a lot of folks come to these webinars looking for top 10 list. Just tell me what to do and I'll follow it. A, B, C, D, E. Doesn't work that way. The situations are complex. Contexts are complex. They're different. So you have to reflect on what's your context. Where do I begin? I begin with the self. Can't start with the others. We will get there, but we start with the self. Fancy word called positionality. Who am I? What's my identity? Reflect on that. Because you see, oppression doesn't start only at institutional level. It does, but it starts here. What am I doing that could be inadvertently discriminating? As neurodiversity just came up, is there something that how I'm showing up that is inadvertently excluding others? It's a question. Before we get to systems and institution, we have to start with the self. So I'm going to go back. As for microaggression, often can make it hard for people like me who have social, and communication issue due to disability, such as the way my brain works. I cannot develop first-person language or use pronouns due to how the brain is wired. Thus, if I were to work any job, I would be written up. Yes. So this is the challenge of the work. And again, I go back to systems are designed to serve the normative culture. As I mentioned, I'm an able-bodied cisgender. Those are norms. Middle class, university educated. I can list all of them for you. That's what the systems are designed for. But anything in the margins, we have to work toward to make sure they're included. So I'm not denying that the barriers are not there. I'm just saying we need a strategy depending on the context. You're a student, you're an administrator, you're faculty. We need to come up with a strategy of how do we mitigate those biases and those barriers in the system. So in order to understand oppression, we have to understand our privilege first, because we take it for granted. As an example, when I'm teaching in McEwen, beautiful building. By the way, I started in the cubicles in Midwoods, and then saw this beautiful building on 104th Avenue. I don't have to worry about washroom usage, although they're inclusive washrooms. I can use whichever washroom I want. I don't have to worry about space. I don't have to worry about, is there an elevator in the building? I just navigate. And that's what I call privilege. It's just taken for granted. So the idea is to interrogate, is this the same experience for all persons? That's the key. And then we take a look around us and say, is there a possibility? People I work with, attend classes with, are different social class, different identities. My whole life, up until I was 30 years old, the world was constructed around two genders, male, female. There was no other gender. That's not part of my socialization. I'm not blaming my parents, but that's what they socialized me to believe. I grew up in a Catholic church / school, strict rules. And I apologize if I'm triggering anything for anybody on this call just by mentioning that. Because in that context, I learned about what is the normative practice. Anything outside of the norm is abnormal, which is outside of the norm. So up until I was 30 years of age, my world was divided in these polarities, male, female. There's nothing else outside of those buckets. So I have to unlearn, relearn of gender identity, gender expression, sexual identity. I'm not an expert as a cisgender, nor will I ever claim to know the being, what we call in sociology, philosophy, ontology, which means a lived experience. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning. I will never know that because that's not my reality, nor should I claim to be one. I can be an ally with them, with the group, but I cannot ever know the reality. That's why it's really important to work with the groups to understand the realities that they're facing, so then I can then figure out, be mindful of my language. I recently learned, like 5 years ago, to use pronouns. It's a very foreign thing to me. I'm making everything that's not obvious to you. So by modeling it for you, I'm showcasing for you, by making myself vulnerable, that you're not born to knowing all of these marginalization. You have to learn it. You have to learn your privilege. You have to learn, you're given certain advantages. So then once you understand that people in your classrooms, your workplaces don't have equal opportunities, we're back to opportunities to succeed, opportunities to participate, opportunities for growth. Because, I went to university to get a good job, to serve as a citizen and be able to participate in public spaces. If I'm denied those opportunities, that's the tragedy because of who I am as a racialized woman of color and how I occur for people. Now think of your own situation. Are there things holding you back? Certain, people spoken up already. So migrant invalidation is exactly that. When you relay your narrative, You relay your story. Part of allyship is somebody denies it, they minimize it. In the IDI, intercultural development, we call it denial of difference. I just don't see any difference. We're all the same. That's painful. Or we'll be in polarization. My experience is better than yours. Or it's valid. Yours, you just made it up. So we have to hold space for people. Or when you relay your story, somebody will try to re-script it and say, you just need to have thicker skin. Just ignore everything that's happening around you. Be resilient. That's a trigger word for me. And I'll tell you why, because once, my parents traveled as immigrants to 3 different continents before we arrived to Canada, so resilient to me doesn't mean much because I lived it. Okay, it's not about resilient alone. I agree. People do need to work on themselves. They need to take a look at how they're showing up for others. Absolutely. Work on ourselves, understand our trauma, work through with a good therapist to understand what's happening for us, ways to improve how we interact with others. Absolutely. However, we also need to take a look at systems. How are systems structured? Who do they serve? Who's at the policy table? Who's at the program table? How are we gauging success? What does success looks like? What does allyship looks like in McEwen? And how do we know people are feeling supported? What's our matrix? Those are deeper questions. This is an introduction to ideas. So when we talk about privilege, when we talk about marginalization, I apologize if the wheel of power privilege is not clear. You'll get the PowerPoint, it'll be much clearer for you. You have to ask yourself, let's take an element. If you speak fluent English, I have an accent. I'll always have an accent. I'm trilingual. I can't get rid of that accent. I am who I am. I just show up. So those who speak fluent English, and whoever defines what perfect English is, will always have an advantage over me. So you have to take a look at, on this chart, where are you located? So certain people by default will have power, will have access. A quick test I've done is one of my courses at the University of Alberta was when I was doing my master's program, is looking at who sits in agency. It was called ABCs, agencies, boards, and commission, a majority of the organization and municipalities across Canada. It was pretty telling. A homework for you tonight is to Google the premiers across Canada. Just take a snapshot of who are the premiers, and you'll get a good sense of who's representing Canada. Certainly not a reflection of the demographics we serve. And one can claim that education is an equalizer. I'm here to remind you gently, education is not an equalizer. There are many layers as to how people make it to that level. So again, guidelines to allyship is, once that's your homework, is when we're in university setting, folks, is to reflect on where do you land on this wheel. Language, wealth, housing, body size, all of that matters. Mental health, we talked about that already. Neurodiversity, we talked about that already. Sexuality, ability, formal education, and skin color. Lots of studies done of the lightness of the skin versus the dark skin. Colorism. Lots of studies done on the darker you are, the difficult it is to find work. I'm talking Canadian studies in particular. Health disparities. I just finished a contract in the healthcare authorities, and there are 700 studies, folks, to showcase healthcare disparities in Canada based on race, Indigenous status, indigeneity. So we're not making up stuff as we're going. Lots of empirical research. So where do I start? Being humble. That people's journeys are different than mine. And I need to be very cautious that I can't take anything for granted. This could potentially be like I said, a painful journey sometimes, going inwards, and it can be sensitive at times. It can be traumatizing at times. So therefore, we always offer people the Employee Family Assistance Program. speak to a counselor, speak to a coach. You need to go to your networks, people you rely on to unpack things that might trigger for you today. Because I work with a really good coach who helps me when I'm triggered by, like I said, when people mention resiliency to me. We're coming close to, and I'll open up the Q&As and I'll go through the chat, not a problem. So what do we have to be mindful when it comes to working with individuals who we feel now we've assessed ourselves, we've taken the time. Who am I? What's my identity? Which group do I identify with? And what privileges do I have in terms of age, sexual orientation, ability, all of that? What power do I have? How can I possibly open up opportunities? How do I leverage my privilege as Candy Khan, educated in the University of Alberta, access to opportunities? And then we say, what are the do and don'ts? It's really important to listen, accept criticism. So, not in this workshop, but I do offer a course in McEwen under the continuing ed, where I do unpack racism. I unpack white privilege. I unpack fragility. When somebody brings up issues and people get offended because it's like, oh, I'm not like that. I don't need to offend anybody. Absolutely. And I'm here to tell you, even, I'm a racialized minority, but that doesn't absolve me that I may also not inadvertently discriminate against another person, possibly. There's also a possibility I may also, violate the respectful workplace policy because I'm not mindful. Now, if somebody brings it to my attention, my job is not to be defensive, rather inquire, even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it's uncomfortable, I have to say, help me understand. How did that behavior impact you? You see, now there's a co-responsibility here. The person who's making the allegation also need to also create space so we can work through the problem. It's not enough just to raise a red flag. It's to also work through the problem because that's in good faith. So people ask me a lot of time they'll ask me, I have a problem with this person I'm working with. Hey, let's sit with the person, help them understand. And let's figure out how do we make this work. Because DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, it's about making the mix work. It's not enough to say we're different. Well, that's nice. How do we make the mix work? Amplifying the voices means please go ahead, express whatever is on your mind. I'll hold space. I have ideas, but I'm going to let you speak. And please, if I interrupt, remind me. I'm an extrovert, folks. For extrovert, we need a gentle reminder to stay in our lane. Part of allyship means staying in my lane. We're working with the LGBTQ community, persons with disability, indigenous population, people of color. Sometimes I need to stay in my lane because, again, privileges, lots of privileges here, lots of opportunities here. I have to be mindful. Also, I think it's really important why I offer the course in McEwen on racism is to understand history. It's really important to understand history, how we got here. And where I start is 1432. I didn't write the history, I just report on it. It's important to start there. The idea of expansion, the idea of colonization, the idea of acquiring land, people, transatlantic slave trade. It's important to know the history. Why? Because we can't unpack what's happening today unless we know where we came from. That's part of the unlearning. So again, part of the work is understanding where we all on this call are from. It's really important. So the difficulty of the work I do, and I'm inviting you to join me in that group, in that camp, is to do the inner work. That we are in a system, to what's already been mentioned so far. We are working in a system that poses barriers for many people. And what can we do collectively? Singularly, it's hard to be the lone voice. That's why on the agencies, boards, and commissions that I have been able to, have the privilege of advising, consulting, I have made sure there's representation, not tokenism, not to have one brown body to say it's nice to have 30% representation. So you're not the lone voice. Allyship is about, collective voice, because that's how you shape policy. And that's how you make change, not as lone voices. The other thing to be mindful of is not to go to an Indigenous person and say, okay, I want you to give me lesson 8 to 10, how I need to show up, without doing the inner work. I have to do that inner work. Nobody can do it for me. I shouldn't expect an LGBTQ counterpart, my colleague, to educate me from A to Z. I should expect a person of color to educate a European A to Z. We need to do the work. How? Attend webinars, read, and I'll give you a secret sauce right now. Get a mentor who's at the other end of the spectrum, who does not share any of the characteristics, remember the privilege cycle, as you do. You learn from them. Let me show you another skill. Get a mentee that you can mentor, but the mentee will then do what we call reverse mentorship. So you learn from them, not for selfish reason, but you're co-learning. That model worked really well when I was with the city. I had 42 mentees paired up with 41 mentors, totally different people. One person took 2 mentees, and they learned from each other. They learned about culture. They learned about communication. They learned about how to resolve problems, conflict resolution. They learned from each other. And that's the beauty. You could take a course, get the theories, academic definition, but it's another to experience it. And don't assume that every member of that particular group, so if I was to say all South Asian women of color have the exact same experience as I do, not true. Because I've been in Canada 42 years. My immigration pattern is different. My parents came as, my father came here to do business in Canada. He came through a very different channel than people coming under family reunification, student, refugees, asylum seekers, different histories. So another South Asian woman on this call will have qualitative, quantitative different experiences than I do. And I have to accept that. So when you approach a member from another group, be very mindful, deal with the person, that individual, get to know them, but be vulnerable, talk about yourself. Don't ask them where they're from as a first question. Open up by sharing who you are and then inviting them to share who you are. Don't compare your struggle with, similar to what I shared in the previous slide, this idea that it's not so bad. Please reframe your thinking, reframe how you're looking at the situation. Rather, help me understand, what does marginalization looks like? When you say you don't feel like you belong, what does that mean? Then if you were to belong, what would that look like? What behaviors would you need to see? So I ask my leaders all the time when they say, I need to create an inclusive environment. Fair. So what behaviors would you like to see change and shifted? Don't take credit for the work that others have done. Now think about your committees, your classroom settings, your workplace. You want to acknowledge people. Don't co-opt knowledge. Acknowledge the source. Acknowledge the history again. And you can say, this, even the Maslow hierarchy, was co-opted and reframed to a North American appetite and desires. Although the history is very much rooted in the indigenous history of the layers of human needs and want and the spiritual connection. So acknowledge, like I always acknowledge, my elders have taught me, when I enter these spaces, I bring the mind, spirit, emotions, and thinking. That's not my thinking, that's the indigenous, the wheel of the holistic approach. I didn't create it. I am essentially relying on the elders I've worked with who are continuously guiding me as to a lot of the work I do. It's not new. It's been there for 5,000 years, if not more. So I'm just reminded all the time, honor the history. Right? Again, the struggle as your own, not to say you will speak, but also look, there's a saying in the D&I world that says, and you've heard this, I'm sure, many times, if you know, I think Nelson Mandela also reiterated this idea that even if one person is oppressed in your team, in your group, in your classroom, in this context, none of us are liberated. In other words, if a member in your community, in your classroom, in your meetings, in your workplace, faculty is feeling like they don't belong, it's on us. It's on us because what's our part to play? Our part to play is to inquire. Am I part of the problem? There's a possibility. And I'm putting myself in the bucket. There's a possibility I am the problem. Then I have to reflect on, what can I do? What do I need to do? How can I make a difference? What's my span of control? Yes, and I asked this question to leaders just last week. It was senior leaders. How many of you on this call, Zoom call, are willing to give up your position at this moment? Because we're talking about diversifying, bringing in different voices at the table. But how many of you on this call are willing to give up your seats to then allow others to step in? No hands went up. Because that's the difficult part sometimes, is to give up some of those benefits. Because the fear is, if I give up, I did a keynote last week for Saskatchewan for International Women's Day on a Saturday, and I shared some stats. People were shocked. And I can share those stats if you're interested. The idea of, who's at the senior CEO across the United States and America. 90% are white males, 0.4 are BIPOC. That's concerning, very concerning for me. So again, who's willing to give up their position to let others speak, amplify? Again, please go ahead, please proceed. I hold space. And if nobody is giving you that opportunity, let me disrupt. Again, a real example, pausing, asking the facilitator, I've noticed a pattern in this workshop that only 2 persons are speaking, but Chandra has not had a chance to speak. So is it okay if we pause and then let everybody speak? Is there another process we can use? And I've disrupted that process many times. So ask yourself, what can you do? What can you do in your classroom, in your faculty meeting, in your boardroom meetings? What can I do to disrupt? Gently. If you do it in a harsh manner, we are part of the problem, because now the other person's on the defense. We want to try it, because the goal here is not to be right. The goal is to be inclusive. If our goal is to, I'm going to be right, then we might not bring other people along. The trick is to bring others along with different styles, different abilities, different ways of being. So the goal is to bring everyone along. So I got to adjust my style. And also acknowledge, even though, so this comes up in my workshop a lot, I'm also oppressed. I had to work really hard to pay my way through school. You could be racialized, Candy, as a racialized woman of color. I understand, but let me tell you about my struggle. It's almost like oppression is a marathon. I'm going to try to show you how much my oppression is way more powerful than yours. That's not the game we're in. The game we're in is all of our oppression and our pain is valid, but to hold space for each other to say, what's my part to play here? How can I make sure that we are collectively, we are raising our voice, making the unknown known, making the invisible visible, advocating necessary, writing when necessary, showing up in meetings when necessary, and banding together. Yes, stand up even when you feel scared. That's debatable because sometimes it depends on context. I got off a call this morning and I talked about this idea of what gets rewarded in classroom, what gets rewarded in workplaces, what gets rewarded in faculty will continue. So, and as an example, if what gets rewarded in the workplaces, nobody questions anything. Nobody questions privilege. Nobody questions if we're being good allies to each other, then nobody discusses it. So it gets buried. But if you're in a context where you raise those questions, you're a culture of inquiry, you're more likely to raise those questions. Yes, own my mistakes. You know, yesterday's meeting didn't go well as I hoped. I interrupted people and I apologize for that. You know, yesterday how I showed up, I think I was activated. My passion got in the way of my message. I think I need to adjust my style and I need to regulate myself before I show up. Because sometimes in my, you know, my activated state, and I'm activated and I'm also perhaps too direct, it might have occurred as aggressive. It might have occurred as too direct, and I might have offended you. So I apologize. So there's nothing wrong. I do this all the time to own how I showed up. I've explained what happened. Moving forward, I will be much more mindful of how I occur. But there is the other responsibility. It's also your responsibility to then work with me on how we can both do this dance together, and you also own your part, if that makes sense. When I say understand education is up to you, it's really literally, where are my gaps, my skill gaps? What do I need to know? What am I curious about? Who do I need to go to? What do I need to read? Which course should I take? Who do I need to partner with in classrooms to understand their social location better, their identity, so then together we are co-creating knowledge, if you will. I'm mindful of time, and believe it or not, I'm 3 minutes away from closing. And I will get to chat, but I'm going to rely on Olga.
Actually, Candy, this is a 90-minute webinar, so we still have time.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm suggesting is the 34 messages in chat and 9 Q&As. So I'm going to make sure that I cover that in the next 30 minutes. So how would you like to proceed with Q&A?
For the Q&A, we have a few comments from Tara about her situation and what she's going through. And I think she's also seeking help on finding a position as an advocate.
Yes.
People in same situations. I've seen some people in the chat trying to give some resources and some options as well for her and anybody else going through the same or similar situations. So I don't know if you would like to just take a couple minutes to see what you can offer or help with.
Absolutely.
So, because all the Q&A are from her.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my suggestion is, this particular topic of the neurodiversity, and this topic of something came in the chat as well, the group that supports the persons with disability and the group that advocates, I think we need to pair this up, right? So we need to figure out, how do we pair this up? We do need a separate session, or perhaps a panel discussion of what policy shifts need to occur in the context of McEwen, because I can't speak for the whole country. I cannot speak for the province. That's too large. That's again, macro. That's a different level of engagement. What I'm suggesting is that, Sean, please make a note, and Olga, make a note that moving forward, we need a separate session on this topic alone, because this is deep, and it goes beyond my expertise, to be frank with you. Because as I mentioned, the systems are designed for normative ontology, which means a being, and this conversation of advocacy, policy change, practices is a whole bucket of work, which I do not feel qualified to unpack at the moment. That's not to say I'm absolving myself. I'm just suggesting we need to somehow figure out how can we connect Tara to the right group, if you will, if that makes any sense. because I don't want you to leave with this feeling that you're just leaving without a follow-up. Now, Alex wrote, in Calgary, there's a wonderful organization called Momentum that focuses on making financial literacy accessible for those who face various barriers. Perfect. So again, what's my need? Who do I need to go to? Who do I need to speak to? Again, reaching out for help, knowing our limitation, and then knowing where the gaps are and reaching out. Thank you for that. Carl wrote, I don't know, Carl, you have to perhaps write some more. That was my timer to say, stop speaking, which I haven't done yet. I made sure my replacement were BIPOC. Phenomenal, Carl. And that's not to say they were less qualified. Let's unpack this myth at this moment. When I talk about diversification, having diversity at the table, it's not at the expense of merit. Please note, if you can walk away with another tip from this webinar, is that we don't lower standards. It's still a competency-based hiring process. What we're suggesting is that you be mindful of who you attract under that net, cast the net wide, and then take a look at who was hired. Shelley, thank you for that, Carl. Shelley saying, I'm seeing the change of saying IPOC, yes. I've had critique of BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color, and then I've been critiqued by my Indigenous counterpart in the healthcare to put the Indigenous. I take full responsibility. The two-spirited, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, they are different acronyms depending on the context in which I work. So in region of Waterloo is different. City of Edmonton, it is different. McEwen is different. Vancouver Coastal Health is a different acronym because the group, I'll give you Vancouver Coastal Health, where I just finished my work. We rely on a group called PRISM. They are the LGBTQ community. They determine what language we should use. So we rely on them. So please pay attention to where you work, where you study. And so we rely on them. Again, not cisgender, able-bodied, don't have an idea. I'm going to rely, University of Alberta, Institute of Sexual Minority. I will rely on the director and my good friend there to guide me because I don't know. I'm just going through all my notes. Young wrote, love the idea, the word femtor, and just would like to share that. The word mentor as a noun comes from a generalization of the characteristics of Mentor in the Odyssey when he was impersonated by Athena, goddess of wisdom. Thank you for that. Thank you, her story, absolutely. History, her story. You see, language, evolving. It's like law. People keep asking me, how come there are new grounds in the human rights legislation? Because law is always evolving. We adjust to cases coming in for discrimination, bullying, harassment, and law adjusts to it. So it's always active, if you will. So things could change tomorrow. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you for your comment. Skip, this is Dolopo, and I apologize again if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please unmute yourself if I'm mispronouncing your name. I was kicked out of nursing in my 4th year. That was a devastating experience as a BIPOC. Yes, I honor that and see other BIPOC going through it. It is the hardest for me when they reach out to me. Yes, so I am working with 11 mentees at the moment, not at the same time, different times. They're all racialized minority women. And their question to me is always, how did you make it? I don't know what make it is. What's your secret sauce? And I have one word for them: lifelong learning. And always get a coach to guide you in terms of reflection, how you're showing up. And again, it's for BIPOC in particular, and I'm going to say POC in particular, because that's who I'm speaking with when I say 11 mentees. Workplace are structured in a certain way. If you would like to be part of that structured way and you're willing to take the time to advocate, to make change, it's a long-term game. If you're committed, let's go for it. If you're expecting to be parachuted in and you're going to make these massive changes and leave, it's not going to happen. So if you're committed for a long time, I will be here for you. But you're not going to be able to do this overnight. So it's a long-term game. D&I is a long-term game, and it takes a lot of energy, lot of energy and time. Thank you for that. Linda, I stepped out of chairing the Affirming Ministry Committee at my church, a position I've held for 5 years. I'm opening space and considering who can be invited to step in. Absolutely. Again, I offer a course thanks to Continuing Ed, again, McEwen. They don't pay me, by the way, to advertise. Basically, in that course, I go through the recruitment cycle, again, taking a look at how's the job or the expression of interest articulated. I can promise you when I do the audit, oftentimes these positions are written for a particular person in mind. So take a look at language. Is the language inclusive, and is the language understandable for different cultures, different groups? What you're asking. Are all skills must have, nice to have, bona fide versus nice to have? And then we take a look at, where did I advertise? Did I mentor? So who's in my leadership pipeline? If I have none, that's where I start. That's where I start. I actually start taking a look at, who did I bring up with me? As an example. Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you, Keely. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Alex. In Edmonton, there's a Self-Advocacy Federation. I think they may be able to help you with support. Okay, so thank you. Thank you again. You see your community right here. People helping each other. It's really dry here in my room. Thank you for that, young Joe. I'm trying to stand up for people with limited English proficiency to secure their language access right. However, I find it hard to fight the systemic racism. Just saying, why don't they just learn English? Why do they have to spend money on them? Absolutely. Many reasons for that. The LEP population are usually immigrant women who are busy raising great Canadian citizens, so didn't have time and capacity to go out and learn English. Very deep question, very thoughtful question. How do I address the systemic change? We start with awareness of the why. I will take you to a whole different journey. Please try to take the course if possible, if you can. If not, you can email me and or email Sean or Olga, and I'm going to send you some resources. Again, you know, many people don't immigrate by choice. They immigrate for a variety of reasons. If you think of Canadian immigrants coming to Canada, if there are no supports for them, you know, again, the idea of the individual somehow needs to be resilient and come up with their own resources. It's not a fair game. It's not a fair ask. So yes, I do hold government accountable for, if you invite people, or if you take people under the Refugee Act, asylum seekers, whatever the situation is, then you are also equally obligated to provide the supports. It's not a favor you're doing. You're looking at integration. You're looking at long-term strategy, exactly to your point about the influence these mothers will have, the children they're raising. So in a way, you're paying forward. If you invest now, it's paying forward. Think about it, young moms with children. If they don't have to worry about, lots of studies on this. I'm not making this up on the spot. Lots of studies on childcare, income coming in, stable income. So it frees up the opportunity to may perhaps take classes, if you will. But if you're tied up with day-to-day survival, you're not going to worry about self-development. We're back to Maslow hierarchy. So to fight systemic racism, to fight, you have to go back to your context, the organization. We have to take a look at who's at the policy table. How do I influence policy? I have to take a look at, am I sitting on boards, commission? Am I sitting at that table? If I'm not sitting at the table, how do I influence it? Who do I need to connect with? So I'll give you a concrete example. At City of Edmonton, we have this advisory board of persons with disability. I work very closely with them to roll out Measuring Up Edmonton in 2009, actually 2010, because I joined in 2008. So I work very closely with persons with disability and learn that there weren't enough auditory signals. Learned about a lip at the sidewalk, which made it impossible for people in a wheelchair to pick up momentum and take the pedway. I also discovered the lack of exclusivity in washrooms. This is all public information, so I'm not giving you anything that will be, you'll have to FOIP. It's all on Google. So again, unless you take part at that level or partner with somebody, it's going to be difficult to tackle it. Because senior, again, you can have your voice, absolutely, but we need to somehow get to governance. Again, back to the agency. So at the moment, where am I starting change? I'm starting change at the governance. Because if it's not going to happen there, it's not going to trickle down. That's a challenge of our work. More than happy to unpack with you, but still, systemic racism again starts with the self. Who am I? Delegate myself. What do I need to do? What resources I need? Next is understand others. Where are they coming from? What are their lenses? What's the fear here? What's preventing them from tackling racism? What's preventing them from giving the money? What information do they need? Am I dealing with people who need facts versus feelings and emotions? If that's the case, how can I provide facts? I was speaking to somebody this morning who said to me, I'm not a feely, touchy person, Candy, give me stats. So fine, I'll give her stats, because if that's what it takes to move her, that's what it takes to move her. So I'll give her stats. 0.4% of BIPOC in senior leadership. That's problematic. There's your stats. Now what are we going to do? That's the next question. So perhaps, Young, it's a matter of collecting your data, because I don't know who you're working with. Let's talk more. Let's continue the dialogue. Carl is writing the QP Pension Committee resolution. It's about encouraging pension funds for Indigenous investment. Excellent, great support. I'm even talking, Young again, thank you. I'm even talking to BC Human Rights Tribunal at the moment, but I'm pessimistic that government ministries have political will, as these people are quiet and passive, usually too polite to speak up, and they cannot speak English anyways, but suffering from not being able to communicate properly. Absolutely. I worked with Ministry of Health recently, so I can share this much with you. Yes, COVID, 2 years of working through crisis. My D&I agenda was not privileged, if I may say so, because of priorities, other priorities. So yes, it's this idea of what gets privileged. So I can tell you the last 25 years of D&I has been ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. What I'm looking for is consistency in terms of building up, moving in the direction of sustainable funding, sustainable programs. So what you're alluding to is accurate. There's fear, there's misinformation, there is saving face, there is what will make me look good. So one of the top questions that I'm asked is, what is in it for me? First of all, Candy, what are you selling? What are you offering? And why should I care? So think of those questions. What is it? What are you selling, marketing, promoting, influencing me on? And then what is in it for me, and how much will it cost? What's the end game? So what does inclusion looks like at the end? So what would offering English courses would look like? How would I know success looks like? What's my benchmark? That's a very important question. If you don't know what your benchmark is, you don't know what you're going toward. What's your end game? We need to answer those questions. Olga, one of the beautiful outcomes about these webinars is the amount of support that should absolutely agree. Again, Isela, wonderful. The Voices of Alberta with Disabilities do advocacy work. Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Jan, no problem. Margot, Bruno, thank you for your Thank you so much for that message. There are many people with good intentions and so much to learn. Yes, intentions are good. It's always the impact. One really important concept within allyship that I want to reiterate is that allies must be identified by the community, absolutely, and are not self-identified. Yes, I just want to be your ally. I'll privilege myself. Thank you for that. I'm in the process of completing my thesis on the role of allyship in Indigenous healthcare. Beautiful. And this is one of the important concept that were taught by my participant. Absolutely. So yes, there are appointed similar to elders. One doesn't become an elder. I cannot claim to be an elder in my own community or a mentor that people are seeking. I just happen to mentor people that came to me. They want to learn about how do you make it in the system? What's the secret sauce? What are the secret doors? Well, the top 3 questions. How does one get promoted? How does one get these secret assignments, what I call growth assignments? How do I get these learning opportunities? I have answers, and I share with them, because those are unwritten rules. Those are unwritten rules. That's why I say we need to make the invisible visible. So who learns? So one of the powerful questions you can ask back in your classrooms, faculty, staff, meetings, wherever you work, how does one learn about opportunities? How does one learn about secondment, special assignment, stretch assignment? Who appoints people? How does one serve on the committee? Those are secret sauces. Nobody knows sometimes. Zane, thank you for coming. Momentum in Calgary, some online was mentioned. Thank you for that. I love this community already. Alex, here's a discussion about sidewalk and accessibility. Thank you. Yeah, I never knew that in Edmonton there were, not anymore, still are, maybe, because I'm no longer working with the advisory group with persons with disability, that if you have a lip at the edge of a sidewalk, I don't care, I'll just walk through it. It's difficult for people to navigate. Again, barriers that I don't see. Thank you, Zane. Lisa Canton and others are allies. Thank you so much. I went through all the comments. Believe it or not. Now I'm going to go through Q&A. I see Tara. Thank you so much. Shelley, can you speak to the idea of allyship and EDI not effective in addressing Indigenous reconciliation, and how Indigenous allyship may look different considering genocide and stolen land? Or is there an expert in the area in McEwen? I will not speak on behalf of Indigenous population or Indigenous expert. I will not speak from that lens because I'm not an Indigenous person. However, I will footnote this by saying the experiences of Indigenous population is totally different than an immigrant coming in here 42 years ago. We have to acknowledge that. So in order to move to a reconciliation, truth has been told by the report with 99 recommendations. I have a report called In Plain Sight for the healthcare in BC. The truth is told. It's there in 42 pages. Now it's a matter of how will we meet the Indigenous population in our healthcare system so they're not marginalized, they are not dismissed, their healthcare takes precedent. The one line from the report is racism kills Indigenous people because how they're treated in emergency. So I agree with you. It takes a different approach, acknowledging history, the genocide, truth is told, reconciliation, the unmarked graves, the acknowledgement of colonization. I cover that in my course, not from the Indigenous lens, but from a racialized lens, but I talk about the concerted effort of the land, the acquisition of land, as well as the acquisition of people. So I agree with you. Sean is in a better position to answer the question of expertise and providing information. From an EDI perspective, it's a very specialized approach. I will not mix it in with the racialized approach because it's a different experience. I arrived here. You were here, or people were here. Sean, I will let you proceed with the response to where they can go to get the help that they need.
Yeah, Shelley, in response to that, Terry Suntjens in the Key Watt Center here at MacEwan University is doing some wonderful work, her and her team, so I can send you some information to maybe put you in touch with her if you're wanting to learn more about what her team is doing and how you can help or how you can plug in and learn. So I'll put that in the Q&A.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for that. What would you say? It's an anonymous, no problem. I'm good with that. What would you say to those who are calling for would-be allies to move beyond allyship and move toward accomplices? For some BIPOC, for example, the impact of oppression are literally killing them. And maybe there's no time for gently calling in their oppressors. Disruption of these systems need to be loud and meaningful and immediate. I am reading too much into this question. It's unfortunate it's from an anonymous attendee because I really want to unpack accomplices. Is anybody else reading this question in any other way? And I'm open to Olga, Sean, Mackenzie, any of my own accomplices, if they're reading it any other way. Because I'm having a hard time sort of understanding what that accomplices looks like. And if you're not comfortable, you can send me a private chat. Oh, Margot, there are some research by Adam Gaudry on accomplice rather than absolutely, no problem. No problem. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. No problem. Just trying to understand context. Without context, it's difficult for me to comment and provide a general comment because I may be exasperating the situation further and making it worse. So I'd rather not do that. I'd rather, sometimes questions are, I always ask myself, is that a fair question right now? And in my context, sometimes it's not because I don't know your context. That's why I'm very careful in responding to some of the comments because I have to be fair. I don't have all answers. Tara, here's a huge tip. Disability intersects all things and much of the neurodiverse community is LGBTQ spirited. Thus, why is it that things like this don't reach out to these marginalized groups? Why do you think that is, Tara? If you can unpack that with us a little bit. Why do you think that is? If there is an intersectionality and the community is experiencing this and information often doesn't reach to them, is because they're not connected, are they not networked well, what, the ways in which the information is shared, how can we be more effective? Yes, Tara, please go ahead. Are you able to unmute yourself? If not, you can type.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Someone had to allow me in. As an autistic who has friends who are LGBT, as an autistic, a lot of the neurodiverse community that are LGBT and or straight like myself face is companies that choose to talk for you, over you, and never with you. They never act on your behalf, and it's always, usually, often a neurotypical and or person similar to you with no disability talking for us, not with us. They talk over us, and they often talk down to us like as if we were children.
Yes, 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 yes. Again, I'm not minimizing your experience. I am hearing your experience. I'm acknowledging your experience. I'm validating your experience. Again, how do we communicate this back? Let's take MacEwan for now. I can't address the larger. Let's take a look at MacEwan. So one of the things I would do is go back with the affinity group to take a look at how can we influence service within MacEwan, how service is rendered. And is there a way of feedback? Is there a way to, again, looping it back to satisfaction? Are you satisfied? I'll give you a concrete example. At City of Edmonton, all the complaints coming in through 311, up until I was there, anything related to diversity, anything related to certain areas would come to me. How do we up our game? How do I meet the needs of those I serve? So that's one way, feedback loop. But that's the advocacy work we need, is to let people know, look, I meet somebody who perhaps mirror some of the challenges that I'm having. So I'll give you a concrete example to Young's point. Sometimes, I'll give you a concrete example. When I first moved to Spruce Grove, I walked into a restaurant and the person was speaking so loudly, just really loud pitch. He made an assumption, and when I spoke, he said, "Oh, you speak English." Okay, so it's the assumption made. I'm racialized. This is Spruce Grove. It's 2011. I understand, but at the same time, it's this the occurrence, how he occurred for me, how I occurred for him. He made an assumption. So to your point, it will be nice to speak to somebody who understands, who mirrors, who matches, and I call that regulating. There's a flow. So I hear you. So we need some sort of a level of point noted feedback to the service provider. Remember, the frontline workers, please don't get upset with frontline workers. As much as we get frustrated with frontline workers, here's a tragedy. And this is not an excuse. They are following protocols. They are literally what they say, doing their job. There's always room for frontline officers, whether it's immigration, in my case, human rights, as in the Human Rights Commission. There's always room for practitioners like myself, when I'm teaching at McEwen or I'm advising, always room for integrating justice, integrating belonging. I can do that, but that discretion lays here. I want to see changes at the policy level, governance level. It trickles down. That's our work. Like I said, that's a long-term work. There are no shortcuts. I wish there were. There are no shortcuts. We're in the long-term game. I've been in this game for 25 years. I have made gains. Things have shifted, but like I said, ebbs and flows. So therefore, to make sure this stuff, like the Truth and Reconciliation, thank you, Shelley, for the reminding me of the murdered and missing Indigenous women report. Downtown East, absolutely, all of the above, Red Women Rising, all of the reports. The action now is policy shifts. That will then shift to practice. You can't change practice unless we know what's the goal. What are we striving toward? So that's the game we're in now. Is now for the first time, I cannot reveal the name of some of the organization I'm consulting with. Now is the first time after George Floyd's death, where the organization saying to me, we need change. Because we can no longer do dress, dance, dinner, dialect, which means celebrations. We have to move beyond celebration. It's really important we do that. So I want to thank, 2 minutes left. I tried my best to go through the questions. I tried my best to go through the chat box. I apologize if I missed anything. Please send your any question, comments to Sean, Olga, Mackenzie, and I promise that I will provide whatever is needed. Any critique is welcome. But when you say that the webinar sucked, I'm okay with that, as long as you provide what needed to change, because that I expect from this fabulous group. Thank you for participating, and I'll go quiet now. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Candy. Wonderful information and wonderful discussion. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and for your participation. I know there's a lot of work to do in this area, and a lot of work for all of us to continue to move the dial forward. So anyone that was on this call participated in this, we thank you again. And if you have, as Candy said, suggestions, comments, critiques, please send them our way. We will send out a copy of the recording of this, as well as the presentation slides after, so you can watch your email for that. And we also have another webinar coming up on April 8th that I'll point out. This is part 3 in our Explore the Rainbow series. So we're quite excited to have some wonderful guests join us for a panel discussion there, talking about their experience as transgender individuals. So that one's coming up on April 8th, as I said. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Candy, for joining us today. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.